Goal of this video is just to clarify some of the things that show up on Worksheet 8, question 2b. So first, let me talk about a function that involves multiple lines of code within the definition of the function. So here, before I do that, let me give an example with only one line. And what do I want to do here? Let's say the input is n, and the output is roll n six-sided dice. Take the two largest values and add them up. So how am I going to do that? Let me say this function is f of n. And so roll n six-sided dice. How am I going to do that? I'm going to do random integer. And you might think it'll be 6 followed by n. But this isn't quite right because this would allow 0 to show up in Mathematica. So I'm going to say from 1 to 6. Okay, that's going to be my n six-sided dice. Okay, and then I can sort this. And then I can take the last two numbers. So how can I do that? Well, here's one way. Let's do -2, -1. So these are going to be the last two numbers after we've sorted it. And then I'm supposed to add them up so I can do total. And it's good to be in the habit of clearing function definitions. So let me clear it before defining this. So let me try that. And let me try f of 3. Okay, that seems believable. But how could I do that same thing using multiple lines? So let me call this g instead of f. So g of n colon equals, and now I'm going to put this inside parentheses. And personally, I think what I'm about to do is going to be a lot easier to read than what I did here. So first I'm going to say like temporary list is equal to random integer. Okay, so that's going to be roll n six-sided dice. Okay, then let's call it sorted equals sort temp. Then let's say, how about AB equals sorted bracket bracket -2 -1. Okay, and then so this is like first do what's on the right and assign that value to temp. Do what's on the right, assign that value to sorted. Do what's on the right, assign those values to A and B. And now this part, so those first three, it's like do something. And this part is what's the value that's going to be returned. And again, let me clear G beforehand. Okay, that way if I make a mistake, there's less likely to be errors showing up when I redefine G after fixing the mistake. And let me evaluate this. And let's do G of 3. And you definitely shouldn't expect it to show up the same value here because there's randomness to this. So each time, even if I were to do f of 3 again, I shouldn't expect to see the same thing. Okay, and those look pretty good. Let's try to make a histogram of G of 10. And let's have 100 of these. So let's make a table or a list of 100 values of G of 10. And let's try the same thing with f of 10. Okay, it looks pretty similar. So I think these two are doing the same thing. And here I can get a better sense for what these different values are. So for example, let me run this with, how about G of 5? Okay, it didn't make it much much bigger, but I guess now that I think about it, it's never going to be bigger than 12, because it'll be 12 if the two biggest numbers are 6, and it can't be any bigger. So in the process of evaluating this g of 5, it should have defined temp. Okay, and this should be a quintuple, a list of length 5 of numbers 1 to 6. And see, there are two 6s here. If I look at sorted, you can see the last two are 6s. If I look at A, that's a 6. If I look at B, that's a 6. And then A plus B is this 12. So this was an example of defining a function on multiple lines. Okay, so this stuff inside the parentheses was all the definition of this function g. Okay, and this did the same thing, did it more concisely, but is definitely harder to read. Okay, what about associations? So let me just give you an example of one of these. You don't need to know much about them in any depth. Here's an example of an association. I'm going to say, or maybe A is confusing since there is an A up above. Let me call it, how about M goes to 2, and let's say N goes to 10. Okay, and let's call this assoc. And then how can I use something like this? Well, let me show you. We say, what is the value? So let's replace M according to the rules here. Okay, so that replaces this M with 2. Okay, what if I say replace A? Okay, nothing gets changed because there is no key of A in here. And if you want to see what are the different allowable inputs, where by input I mean what can come to the left of this front slash dot, I can do keys of assoc. Okay, and here are the keys. What about, let me call this, how about my keys? And my keys, double brackets 1, that's this M. And let's find out what kind of thing that is. Okay, whereas if I were to look at this, well, I guess this A is also going to be a string. Yeah, so never mind. If I were to ask what is head of A not inside quotation marks, okay, I get an integer because it's defined as an integer up here. What if I do, let's say I want a blue letter. There's a blue letter. Okay, this is called a symbol. So only other thing I want to say about this is there's a complement to keys, which is called values. And so what are the values of this association? Okay, and the values are these things that show up on the right side of the arrows, at the heads of the arrows. And if you've done Python before and you know dictionaries in Python, these associations are very related to Python dictionaries. So last thing I want to talk about is classify. And so how does this work? Well, there are a bunch of built-in functions to Mathematica. Okay, here are some of them based off of classify. And so the one I ask you to work with in this worksheet 8 is sentiment. And how does that work? So it tries to analyze, is the string here, does that express a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment? And let me go to one of the other ones. So let me do language here. And let me try to do Guten Tag in German, but let me spell it wrong. So the real way to spell it is like this. But let's say I didn't know how to spell it and I spelled it with 2 O's, Guten Tag. And let's see what Mathematica thinks this is. Hey, it said German. And what if I ask for let's do all probabilities. And what about if I do top probabilities? So it thinks there's a very high chance that it's German and about a 20% chance that it's English. Hey, what about if I do hola, señor? Hey, it's very confident that this is Spanish. And how can you evaluate something like this? Well, if you hover your mouse over it, you can see the way to type it in Mathematica. So it's entity, brackets, quotation marks, language, comma, Spanish. So if I do entity, quotation marks, language, quotation marks, Spanish. Okay, and then I want to replace that according to this classify. Okay, I get this number 0.78. Okay, or if I do it for German, so this is going to say, what does the Mathematica artificial intelligence classifier for the language function, what does it think is the probability that this hola señor is in German? Oh, and I have to change it back to probabilities so that I get all of them. Because why didn't it work back when it was top probabilities? Let me show you. So here, this, I guess it's not an association, but it's a list of rules. And notice that there's only one key in this. Okay, if I do keys, okay, I only get this Spanish. If I do values, again, it's length 1. Okay, so when I tried to replace this entity of German according to this rule, nothing showed up because German was not one of the keys in here. Okay, but then when I changed it to probabilities, okay, then here's German, it's like 0.3%, and here's exactly that 0.3% that was showing up before.